With the name of God, who is the most gracious and the most merciful, who is the creator of all things, in the presence of our ancestors, all of them who have contributed to our being here and made it possible for us to know what we know and do what we do and be where we be, in the presence of those whose contributions have made it possible for us to strive, to struggle, and to accomplish, we now invite their spiritual presence to be with us as witnesses to what we do and as teachers from their higher plane of those things which we are now ready to receive. To my very, very good friend and distinguished colleague, Dr. D. Philip McGee, the Dean of the School of Ethnic Studies at San Francisco State University, who I have known, as he says, for a very long time, and I really credit him with being in many ways one of my important mentors when I needed a mentor from California. And you know that's a special teaching that comes from California. And to all of you who are very dear friends who have become very familiar to me as I move around the country, much too much for my wife's sake and my children's sake, but it certainly seems that increasingly I have an extended family from one end of this country, from one end of the world, really, because from London to Ghana to California to Oregon to Washington State to D.C. to Florida to Canada, there are people who are very familiar, very kind, very loving, and certainly I understand the nature of this extended family which we are all a part of. I must begin by saying to you with that long salutation, Hotep, Assalamu alaikum, Abaragani, and yo. These conferences are interesting. On the one hand, we feel in many ways that we could not live without this opportunity to engage in this very critical dialogue about who we are. It is certainly the more exciting times of my life when we are able to come together with brothers and sisters who understand that we need a new direction for ourselves and have committed themselves to trying to grasp and understand that direction. And at the same time, it's also interesting to see us struggling with the competing habits and mentalities which this slave condition has created in us. How we struggle against our westernized way of doing things and understanding things. When we struggle against the tendency to exaggerate the good in an effort to contend with so much of the bad which we've internalized and made a part of ourselves. How we are trying desperately to dignify many of our customs that have become degraded within the context of this culture and in this reality. And to see us sincerely trying to make this thing make sense. And most importantly, trying to love and support each other in the process. And despite the criticisms and despite the recognition that we are not all where we would like to be, the fact that basically something important is happening in America. Something very strange is happening in America that was not ever supposed to happen. Somehow, out of every effort that they could possibly make to conceal, obscure, distort, omit, dissociate, alienate, violate, and propagandize against, we have still managed to penetrate the barrier of triple darkness. And in doing so, we have come to the dawn of beginning to know something of the greatness of who we can be. The excitement of the new day often invigorates us to such an extent that we forget that day is a long time. And we often expect the full noonday sun at the dawn. But it is important to understand that when darkness has been and has run its course, the dawn and the morning come slowly, and the full day is even slower. It means that we must learn to practice patience and to understand that to undo what has been so severely done must be done with patience, discipline, commitment, determination, and an understanding that it will take time. That means that we should not then presume that we can know it all automatically. We must begin to understand that even before people could come to grapple with the depths of this knowledge, even in a culture that was paraded with signs and symbols and myths and images that propagated and penetrated the unconscious mind to bring one into an awareness of what one could become aware of, it still took them 40 years to master the fundamentals. Now, in that context, that exalted context, where all things around were pointing in the right direction, it took that long. You can imagine how long it would take in this context, in the hell, in the depths of nothingness, in a society where all the signs and symbols are inverted. You can imagine how long it will take here to begin to even see clearly what it is we need to see. So let's love each other, and let's be patient. Let's not expect everyone to know it all the time, automatically. And most of all, let's not think that you know it all, because you don't. And let me furthermore suggest that the more you're convinced that you got it now, and you know all you need to know, let me submit to you that you know less than you ever knew. And you're a bigger fool than you were at the beginning. And in that context, we must understand that we are dedicated and devoted to growth. Let me take my few minutes before my lights start flashing. It takes me so long to say good morning. This thing of melanin is extremely important. It's important that we understand fully, as best we can, what is the purview of our study. In the context of what I said a minute ago, it's important that we not confuse and distort our higher science with Western lower science. It is important that we do not distort and contort round spherical reality and force it into a linear boxed reality. It is important that we understand that melanin is more than biological, biochemical science. It is important that we understand that melanin stands not only as a statement of biochemical, physiological process, but it also is a statement about certain aspects of aspiration, both socially, culturally, and spiritually. We must understand that melanin symbolizes what we need to understand about blackness. And what I want to talk about for a few minutes is exactly that. What is this blackness thing? What is there about blackness that so terrified Europeans that they had to distort it into being a form that they saw as being the antithesis of everything good and positive? What was there so intimidating about blackness that they somehow took it and made it the epitome and the personification of all forms of negativity? What was there so devastatingly frightening about blackness that it became necessary for them to define and predicate their worth in contrast to the negation of our disworth, or the disworth of blackness? And to call themselves white in contrast to black represented this tremendous aversion, fear of, terror of whatever this blackness thing is. Furthermore, it became very necessary for them to not only define their own cultural reality within the context of this negation of blackness, but there was something critically necessary in order to make those people who wore the garment of blackness perceive that garment as being negative, aversive, disgusting, degraded, and unapproachable. In other words, in order to render us powerless, it was necessary to convince us that to be black was an aversive reality. It was necessary to operate on a consciousness. You see, they couldn't deny the biochemistry. We are not in a struggle, but as we talk about melanin, we are not trying to restore the activity of the melanocyte. Its chemical process has always done exactly what it was supposed to do. The melanocyte has always been the pigment that was able to radiate, if you will, and fragment the color spectrum in the way that it's supposed to do. It has always been the proper buffer for ultraviolet rays. It has always been able to do all of the biochemical things it's supposed to do. In other words, melanin ain't new. Melanin was never enslaved. Melanin is still doing what it has always done since it occurred in the creative process of life itself. So it is important to understand then that if there is something magical about melanin, then the magic has already been here. And it is important that we not begin to presume that there is a magicalness, if you will, in suddenly becoming aware that there is this thing known as melanin. It is exciting to be fascinated about what it can do biochemically. It is exciting to be moved by its tremendous intricacy of fusing the biological, the biomedical, the biochemical, and even the biospiritual in ways we never understood. It's a fascinating substance because it somehow seems to permeate all aspects of not only black life, but life in general. It's a fascinating concept, and it's a very seductive concept to begin to believe, aha, we got the key now. All we got to know is about our magic blackness. But I want to submit to you that we should not make the error that the narrow-minded, limited, conscious, linear perception of reality in a box sense of what's real, Europeans and their paradigmatic conception of ontology, which sees the visible as being the real, to begin to assume that the visible is the only real. It is important to understand that all things that are visible are no more than arrows pointing to a higher reality. And that all things that are materially real, and they are real, are signposts to a higher reality. It's what our people in the ancient days referred to as the netters. They saw all things in nature as signposts pointing to a higher reality, and so is melanin. Now, what then, in the humble opinion of this frayed, struggled, beat down brother here, what then is this melanin thing? It is important that we understand that if in fact biochemically melanin has never been handicapped, the question is, what has been handicapped? Melanin has never hid, because your blackness is the clearest thing I can see. It is the one thing that made you so utterly identifiable that it became the symbol of your stigma. No one ever had to brand you. No one ever had to tag you. No one ever had to label you. All they had to do was call you black. And there you were. And furthermore, it has been that way since the origin of black life. That's why it's possible to go back in history and pull out the artifacts and see he was a black man. Because this thing of blackness tends to be permanent in a way that's sort of undeniable and impregnable and impenetrable, and it is certainly blackness in the truest sense. So therefore, when we go back and see the artifacts in Mexico or the artifacts in Kemet or wherever we go, we can see the black face. We can see the black person, because the certainty and the continuity of blackness is undeniable. So if the physical part has not been out of sight, what has been out of sight? I submit to you that there is in the acceptance and the embracing of our blackness, that is, the ability to begin to love again our blackness, a power that we cannot see. It is a power that we cannot see. We must understand that melanin is not simply a defensive mechanism by which white people try to oppress. It's not just that. There are psychosocial consequences, but it's not just that. There is something more important about this thing in terms of its meaning to us. Now, it has meanings to white people, and I'd like to let Dr. Welsing deal with that because she does well about that in her counter-racist psychiatry. But I want to talk about what does it mean to us, and why is it so important that we come to grips with being black. Even though I strongly adhere to, suggest, and advocate the importance of becoming culturally sensitive to who we are as African people. I have been writing about that for almost 15 years, that we should call ourselves African people. I'm glad that Jesse and his gang finally caught up. We thank them for that. Let's understand this. We must understand that African people in Nigeria are buying more bleaching cream than you are because they reject their blackness. We want you to understand that they're selling more bleaching cream now in Ghana than they're selling here because they reject their blackness. I want you to know that the curl activators are selling wholesale in an inflated market. They got greasy curls hanging all down their face in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Lagos, in Accra, because they reject their blackness. God knows, I believe, that we are of Africa, and that Africa is the story, and that Africa is the system, and Africa is the mechanism, and Africa is the culture. But we got to overcome this aversion to being black before we can embrace Africa. Otherwise, we will embrace the symbolism. Otherwise, we will embrace the artifacts, but we will not embrace the life of accepting ourselves as a nation of black people. Now, we want you to understand that the Europeans, some of the wiser ones, understood that there was a certain amount of dignity that people were able to preserve in themselves when they looked at their reflections, found in their mirror, and found in their brothers and sisters, and found in their offspring, and found in their lovers, and found in their grandchildren. All of those are mirrors. And the Europeans understood that people were empowered by seeing what they loved in the faces of themselves. And therefore, it was necessary to make us begin to see in the faces of ourselves something that we hated, something that we thought was ugly, something that we thought was distasteful, something that we thought was remediable, something that we identified with our lowly economic, political, social state. It was necessary that we not be able to look in the face of a jet black woman and see black beauty. It was necessary that you not be able to look in the face of a black man and see something that was implicitly beautiful, and not by exception, but by necessity. You know, we have this old thing about, you're the prettiest black girl I ever seen, as if it is absolutely impossible to be black and attractive. Now, we understand we have a wide range of colors, but the acceptance of the brown, the red, the high yellows, all those variations we have, is predicated on whether or not we have come to grips with accepting the black among us, because in that is the empowerment. Now, why? Melanin, in addition to everything else that it is biochemically, is an organ of consciousness. Melanin is an organ of consciousness. The eyes are an organ of consciousness. They let in light to the body. The brain, of course, is our most advanced organ of consciousness. It is the way by which we know that we know. The skin represents a certain capacity to perceive a reality that's known as touch. And I submit to you that the reason that melanin biologically is found in the neural crest is because out of the neural crest grows all of the mechanisms in the body that are responsible for consciousness. Now, please do not be as naive as our Western sons and daughters who believe that somehow the brain is the mind, who confuse the computer with the builder and the programmer of the computer, who somehow in their simple-minded conceptions think of the mechanism as being the thing. Let us understand that the mechanism is not in the thing, even though we do have a mechanism. And I submit to you that this melanin concentration, this melanin pigment that not only colors all of us, but even when it is not visibly present, its concentration permits us a certain kind of consciousness. What kind of consciousness is that? Well, in the very earliest articles that began to be done on the functioning of melanin, Phil McGee was one of those first writers in Voodoo IQ. He laid out the idea that the mechanism for ESP, the mechanism for telepathy, the mechanism by which we feel that which we do not see, the way that we know that which we do not know. In other words, the mechanism of intuition that some Westerners have identified but have not been able to show the mechanism for, mainly because it was not operating at a high level within their own biochemical makeup. The reality of it is that the mechanism for that is in melanin. Now, how do we know that? We know that because we've been able to demonstrate that those people who have those concentrations are able to do certain kinds of abilities. They've been able to connect that to show that messages are actually transmitted across that. But it's also a bigger picture than that. We've often talked about this thing that African people have, that is we refer to as the basis of African ontology, is I am because we are. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean we are socialist? No, not in the political sense of the word. We don't give any kind of preeminence to the state. But there is this undeniable, intractable interconnection that African people hold with each other. There's a strong sense that we are because we are. There's a strong sense that we have no sense of ourselves unless we are hooked up with the community. And everything that we do tries to reaffirm the connectedness with the community. I'm talking about African people in their right minds. You see, I'm not talking about the crazy ones. I'm not talking about folks who want to go sit in a treehouse and meditate on leaves. I'm talking about African people who are African people are always engaged in this interpersonal thing that is so much a part of who we are. And most of us philosophically understand I am because we are. But where or is there a mechanism for it? Well, let's see. Language, of course, is something we share, but language emanates out of our individual mouths. Thoughts and ideas and awareness, those things emanate out of our individual perceptions of who we are. We can talk about things that we see that sort of bring in the outside, but what is it that has to do with consciousness and awareness that we share generally among ourselves? Where is the mechanism for transpersonal consciousness? Now, what is transpersonal consciousness? Transpersonal consciousness is that whole ability to know collectively rather than individually. Transpersonal consciousness is that group awareness, the awareness of ourselves as black people, ourselves as African people, ourselves as a community of people. Where is the mechanism that ties us together not only in terms of the events of history, but the psychophysiological, spiritual connectedness between the here and the now? I submit to you that melanin is that mechanism. It's almost as if we have eyes that we share together. It's like ears that we share together. But not only is that mechanism of melanin which bathes each of us, if we are black, that does that, but it is the fact that it is not only transpersonal, but it is also transtemporal. That means that the blackness came from mama and daddy and grandmama, but the blackness also comes from the origin. From way, 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 way back, blackness has been there. In fact, blackness was there when we started. Blackness was there in the 18th dynasty and the not-so-black dynasties. Blackness was there at the mouth of the Nile when civilization began and when it wasn't. It was there in the Sudan. It was there in Ethiopia. It was there in Mali, Songhai, Timbuktu. It's always been there. The blackness has been that thing that has continued across time. Blackness has been the continuation of what's there. And blackness is the thing that not only ties us all together in a shared consciousness, but it ties us all together with all of those who have ever been black since the time of blackness began. So, look what happened then. When you reject blackness, you reject access to history. You understand? When you reject the black face, when you reject the black skin, when you cannot feel an intensity of a love and affiliation and attraction to your own black self, when you can't look at your little black baby and say, oh, you black thing, I love you. When you can't look at your black woman and your black man and your black mama and see in her black beauty, not because she's black, but loving her without blackness being a barrier. Until you've been able to penetrate that level of self-rejection, you will not be able to penetrate the time zone. Because the energy and the power of the time is contained within the secret of the melanin. It is the consciousness of time over time, and is the consciousness of people reaching beyond the limits of who they are. Now, we must understand that what is in blackness is the same thing that the ancients demonstrated that existed in any other form or level of consciousness. And that is that the highest image of awareness was given symbolically as the eye of Horus. The idea that the eye symbolized a visual representation of knowledge, enlightenment. Because how does the body, remember those physical images pointing to something higher? How does the body know? The body knows because of light coming in. And what do we say when someone is explaining a complicated idea to us and our response is, oh, I see? Because seeing serves as the cognitive metaphor for the subjective experience, the visual metaphor for the cognitive experience of actually being able to understand. So knowledge, understanding is done, it is prepared, it is executed by way of the mechanism of the vision, of the eye. So we submit to you that in this blackness, we have the eyes and the memory of time stored in us. We have the eyes and the visual capacity of time stored all over us. And the concentration of that and the acceptance of that is the avenue and the vehicle by which we are able to begin to come to grips with ourselves. Now, I'm going to close this. I want to make this very brief because I have one little point to make, and this is it. It's the idea that we must understand that in order to use the mechanism of melanin, it is not simply being black. It is not simply dressing black. It's not simply going through the rituals of blackness. We must understand that in order to use the mechanism of melanin, we must be able to raise ourselves to the level that the mechanism is useful for us. Now, please understand that for lower vision, we have the mechanisms to see that. You don't need a great deal of training, really, to be able to let the eyes, the physical eyes, bring in light. They bring in light whether you see it or not, whether you understand what you're seeing or not. It brings the light in. The physical eye is there. Now, we understand that there's another eye in the head that we understand as being the intellectual eye. And we know that with a little training and a little orientation, the intellectual eye begins to be able to see things. And the intellectual eye sees at a higher level than the physical or the physiological eye. Now, I want us to understand is that the eye of the transpersonal consciousness as personified in Melanin requires an even higher development, a higher discipline, a higher training than does being able to see out of the physical eye or the intellectual eye. Now, I'm sure this disappoints a lot of folks, because I'm sure that many of us thought we got it now. We black, baby. We black. Oh, and being black is all it is. We black and they white. And because we black and they white, that means we automatically better than them. No, that's not it. It means that we've got something special. But to use something special, you've got to be special people. We want you to understand that in order to use this heightened ability to easily move through bodies or move through time, that you must develop yourself high enough so that your weight and your density is limited enough that you can diffuse yourself easily wherever melanin goes. Now, what does that mean, Akbar? Don't be so mysterious and oblique here. What do you mean by that? We mean that we were put on a path. The ancients always talked about ma'at, that the moral system, the scientific system, and the spiritual system were enmeshed, inescapable, and absolutely ineradicably hooked up. Is there such a word as that? Anyway, you know what I mean. The point of it is that they were all so tightly connected that you could not do one without the other. You could not be moral and not be scientific. You could not be scientific and not be spiritual. But it was necessary to be all of those things. So the Pharaoh symbolized in the ancient land the personification, the fusing of the elevated consciousness of the people. And the correct pharaohs were trained physically, they were trained scientifically, they were trained spiritually, but most of all, they were trained to develop a pharaonic system within. So before they could become a pharaoh for the people, they had to be pharaohs in themselves. So Ma'at, the urea standing upright, had to be established within the system of the ruler. So rulership had to be established in the first Kemetic kingdom, the Kemite kingdom that had black arms and black legs and black eyes and black feet and black knees and black elbows. That's where the first Kemitic kingdom was. And you as a leader, or you as a person, or you as a participant, in order for you to exercise the power of your blackness, you had to establish a well-disciplined kingdom within. So that meant that in order for you to access higher power, you had to be of a higher form. You couldn't do it drunk. You couldn't do it, listen, you couldn't do it assuming that everything that gave you life had to be sex. You couldn't do it trying to find an insatiable gut. You couldn't do it if everything of the lower plane was demanding your attention, demanding your energy, demanding your responsibility. We aren't talking about nice, good, bad stuff. We aren't talking about that level. We're talking about morality as a science. We're talking about if you want to access higher power, you got to go up to a higher plane. Now, if you want to deal on a lower plane, then deal. I mean, there's all kind of bestial things that can be done on a bestial plane. If you don't believe me, look at America. Watch Search for Tomorrow, The Edge of Night, Dynasty. They have a good time. They get down. They act just like cats, dogs, animals, and all kinds of strange. You can deal on that level and get lots of benefits from doing so. But if you want to draw energy from the Sirian star system, you got to get to the highest mountain so you can see the sprinklings of the stars. If you want to draw energy out of the ancient tombs, of the ancient dead, of the ancient Kemetic Valley, of an ancient time that is long past, and access to the symbols to even get in can't be reached, you got to move closer to that in time. How do you do that? You must jump on the spaceship of time, the spaceship of blackness, and slide through the time capsule. Blackness is the time capsule. Ride the time capsule back to the origin of yourself, and in doing so, you can't do it overweight. You got to do it the right size. You can't do it horny. You got to have all numbers in check. You can't do it high on nothing. The highest high is the high you were given. The highest plane you can ride on is not a rock, it's not the dust, it's not the coke, it's not the reefer, it's not the LSD, it's not the ganja, it's not the ganja's mama, it's not the poppies, it's not the peyote. It is blackness will ride you wherever you want to go. If you go, listen, when you go out in space, they tell us that out in space, once you've reached beyond the reflective light that hits the earth and gives us an appearance of light, you have nothing but blackness everywhere the eye can see. So if you want to know about space that reaches in the depths of space, in the depths of time, you got to go there in the time capsule, which takes you way out into black space, which is in the black self. Now you can't do that unless you raise you up. So I got bad news for you, brothers and sisters. Confused. Don't be confused about people talking black talk and living white filth. It's not going to work that way. It will not operate that way. You must, in fact, exemplify that you're struggling. Ain't none of us perfect. I told you to begin with, it takes a long time. But that's no excuse not to try. And if you want to access what we are talking, you see, either we are talking about something big or we ain't talking about nothing. And if we are not talking about something that's bigger than the sanctified church, if we ain't talking about something that's bigger than getting on a plane and riding over to Mecca, if we are not talking about something bigger than the pharaohs had 4,000 years ago, if we are not talking about something bigger than a sphinx that is being decayed by a world that has polluted the atmosphere and disrupted it and is bringing down even the stone that has stood for these thousands of years, if we're not talking about something bigger than a pyramid that stands in the middle of a desert where Arabs run around getting your dollars and dimes to ride on camels to look at the stones you put together, if it ain't no bigger than that, let's just get a plane ticket and be black. But if it is bigger than that, that means that we've got to use the symbols as access to the higher power that's ours. Brothers and sisters, the answer is really easy. It's easy in the sense that if we will understand that in order to reach the heights of the consciousness that the melanin implicates, that the only way we can reach the magnitude of what the melanin offers us is to be able and to be willing to, first of all, establish a loving relationship with it. To overcome by confronting that we were taught to hate it. To deal with the nuances of mind control and propaganda that has made us believe that everything from God to Santa Claus to a scientific rat is white. We don't even get good black rats to run in labs. We don't consider his biology being pure enough unless it's an albino rat. We have no desire, no love for any of those things that represent us. Only when we come to understand the power and the dignity of this blackness, that's the only way we can begin to move the curtain of ignorance back and stop jiving and start dealing. Now, the other part is the importance of out of that love comes commitment. You see, when you love black, it's bigger than an individual. And even though I may love you greatly, I love us more. And even though you may mean a lot to me personally, all of you mean much more to me collectively. Because I know that in you, in us, is contained all of the solutions to all of the problems that need to be solved. And in this limited lifetime that I might be here, or my wife might be here, or even my own biological children might be here, there is no way to make it all happen. But if all of us are all striving to make it happen, it will happen. And that's where the commitment has got to come from. And after the commitment, the work has got to come. Day-to-day work on ourselves, building the knowledge, correcting our faults, correcting our shortcomings, bridging the gaps, making sure that there's always black love that's operating, holding us together, cementing us together, driving us constantly. Whenever we get mad with each other, go back and find out, are we mad because we are hating ourselves because we are black? Are we hating the consequences of blackness? Or are we hating the consequences of whiteness? Let us love who we are and always try to bridge the gaps that keep us divided. And as we begin to manifest in our actions and in our work and in our hard strivings, the same things that the ancients manifested as they worked day in and day out, making sacrifices to the higher images that kept alive in them the aspiration for transcendence and ascendance. And as we work collectively as the builders of the mighty structures that built the pyramids and built those structures and built those symbols of power we're able to do so by collective energy, collective work, collective responsibility, collective force, and the synergy of bringing together the very best of all that we represent. As those ancients were able to exemplify by their unified effort the raising of mighty structures that stand to show what united work can do, and as they built mighty cultures that showed what united effort could do, and as we have shown that by simply being forced to be aware of who we were collectively as black folks within a crazy white context, we were able to overcome, even in rejecting who we were, being forced to know who we were. We thank God they made us know that in all else they did, we were still black, even though they made us not like black. We saw in those other black ones like us the opportunity to tap the energy that gave us, even in our struggle, depression, oppression, and deprivation, the spiritual power to be able to transcend even the bullets of destruction that were geared towards destroying our awareness of who we were. We were able to overcome the collective effort on the parts of the enemies to create a mind in us that would make us completely self-destruct. And when they thought we were down, dead, and done, we woke up with black power, empowered ourselves, and changed the world. Peace be unto you.
Peace.
I'm not down. That's okay. Thank you. Yes, Sister, peace be with you.
Peace, brother. I'd like to know, what is the training that you're speaking about? Okay. What do we do? How do we reach out to our brothers and sisters who are still Negroes?
Okay.
And, yeah, how do we reach out and what do we do?
Okay. The first step is to reach out to each other who think we are black, you see. And I think that, you see, the cadre must be with those initially who've made a conscious decision. You see, the thing about human advancement, that it requires a conscious decision. Conversion, even though people particularly in the church, have been made to believe that it is something that happens to you, that overcomes you. In reality, conversion is a conscious decision to submit to what you feel. So the force of submission is always there, but you have to make a conscious decision. Now, what that tells us is that in order to make a move, to advance ourselves, we must make a conscious decision to do so. Now, what happens? Once you've made a conscious decision and join with others who've also made a conscious decision, then your work becomes to build those kinds of indicators, those kinds of bright lights and signposts that begin to draw those in the darkness to the shore where you've established a refuge for the conscious, you see. So the question is, what do we do with our study groups? What do we do with these conferences? What do? We must do in these opportunities when we come together with each other is structure, hammer and nail up structures that begin to broadcast, that blows the bugle, blows the horn, say, hey, we over here, come on, check it out. Now, this is not a process where you can go around and choke the truth in people. You can beat them, you can cuss them. You know you tried, some of y'all married to people trying to get, man, you know, come on, baby. I don't want to be bothered with that black mess. You black me to death. I don't want to hear that. I mean, it's hard. I mean, you eating out the same plate, sleeping in the same bed. Can't get them to wake up. So it's not something you can force on to people. This must be a conscious decision. All of you who are here got here because somebody had a sign up, had a light up, had a tape on, had a book on, had a speaker they want you to hear, want you to see something on TV. Check this out. Look at this. See this. And that's because people were building, putting up things that served as an attractive force to bring people into that awareness. So my answer to that, sister, is that we build each other by working together collectively to do what we must do, and we get those who have not yet come to where we think we are going by constructing those kinds of things that will bring them that way. And the interesting thing is, you see, is that the structures won't stand if they're not valid. Only the valid structures will stand. And the valid structures will stand, they will strive, they will thrive, they will be attractive, and people will come in to see what's going on. You know, flowers have these incredibly beautiful, seductive pistils and stamens and all kind of floral things. Just beautiful. Drives hummingbirds crazy. Makes a bee go mad. Got to get to the honey. And I'm saying that as we begin to build these beautiful structures in our character, in our relationships, in our institutions, in our research, in our work, we begin to put this flower garden that attracts all the bees to come on and get some of this nectar of self-awareness and self-consciousness and the awareness of the God that gave you who you are so you can get back to yourself. So that's the way I think it's done.
I wanted you to speak on some more practical ways that we could raise our level of consciousness, whether, having to do with diet, whether it have to do with anything like that. And also, I wanted you to speak on different ways that we can become more disciplined. Okay. I mean, it's easy to talk about being disciplined, but exercises and things we might associate ourselves with that would help us become more disciplined.
Okay, we say all the time that all of the religious systems came out of African systems. We say Christianity did it. We say that the Hebrew religion did it. We say that Islam did it. But at the same time, when we say that, then we start condemning them and eliminating the whole system without trying to look then, if it came out of our thing, what is it that's left of value and what is it that is of no value? Where is the benefit of those things that came from us? We say there would be no Christianity if there had not been an ancient Egyptian religion. We said there had been no Islam if there had been no ancient Egyptian religion. So the question is then, since we are finding so much difficulty in completely reviving and replicating what preceded these systems, if these are derivatives of those systems, let's use our enlightened wisdom to find out what is here that is still correct as opposed to what is still wrong. Now, if the 10 Commandments represent a condensation of the 41 negative confessions, then that must mean they must still be correct. Now, we didn't say they belong to the Jews. All we're saying is that the source is wrong, you see. So if the principles of spiritual development that is identified in religious systems are, in fact, of the same origin that we say they are, then we then, if we have no comparable mechanisms, must then draw upon those systems that will help us advance ourselves spiritually. Okay? Now, if that's the case, then let's look at some of those things. Now, every one of these religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, speaks very highly of the need for fasting as a mechanism of spiritual advancement. Every one. Not only do all the religious books say it, and of course we know it's in the Eastern or in the religions too, but it's also taught by all of the metaphysicists. All of those people who teach metaphysical growth tell us the benefits of fasting, you see. Now, if fasting then works, why not fast? You see, and start worrying about, well, that's in the Bible. So what? It's a lot of good stuff in the Bible. It's a lot of good stuff in the Quran. And if you wise fool, take out the wisdom and leave the mess. You see, You see, it's the fool who somehow drinks the whole thing down when he knows part of it's poison. Now, if you don't know how to distinguish it, you're right, leave it all alone. Don't bother with none of it. But if you are growing in wisdom, you should be able to take some selections of things that value. Now, we then know that spiritual advancement requires us to refine appetites. And refining the appetite is done by controlling the appetites that compete with control over us. So fasting then is a mechanism for doing that. And it can be done in various ways. Religions prescribe it in different ways. You have to find a way that will work for you in this context and make that do. Another thing, the principle of charity is a principle that we find manifested in all aspects of life. And we find that all forms of life give up something. And their greatest benefit comes from what they give up. I mean, trees give up their leaves, and the sun gives up its heat, and the water gives up its moisture, and everything gives up something. Well, we must learn to systematically learn to give up some of what we value. Why? Because as we give up some of what we value, we begin to release ourselves from the karmic anchor that Ishmael Jamil said that keeps bringing us back to redo what we don't need to do no more. Okay? Now, that's Judaism, that's Christianity, that's Islam. Now, if I'm an anti-black, anti-African blasphemer by saying that, so be it. Because these are the same mechanisms that the ancient priests used. They're the whole process of serving each other, giving service to each other. Being a servant to each other is a discipline. It takes patience, it takes time, it takes work. But every time you get stronger in patience, you become stronger in consciousness. Every time you don't feel you've got to have that new pair of shoes, you get stronger in character. Every time somebody who needs is able to get strong from what you give, you've gotten greater strength for you and for them. So the mechanisms are there. Pick and choose. Do what I do. I get a little bit of the good stuff out of all of them. You know, sometimes you may see me meditating like a yoga, like a Buddhist. Other times you'll see me praying like a Muslim. Other times you may see me like singing a song like a good old Christian. Other times you may see me engaging in the personal discipline and management of the physical and material world as a means of creating a symbol on earth that will prepare me for a kingdom a kingdom on high in the spiritual sphere, as the Jews do. So you will see me working in every sphere of activity, drawing the best from all those religious systems, because I think there's in all of them, as we all know, is the kernel and root which we put there. None of them could exist unless they were built on what we put there. And I've got to trust the fact that by testing, using the light that has been put on up here in this visual system that has come to life between my eyes, I can pick out what I need and leave the crap alone. That's my suggestion.
Very basic truth, which was that melanin never went out of style, which is to suggest, obviously, that if we accept it as truth, it was inevitable that we would at some point come together with that body of knowledge and hopefully advance it. To go one step further, you also referred to the neural tube.
Neural crest.
The neural crest.
Neural crest.
The neural tube, which gives rise to the neural tube, from which all neural systems develop. Mm-hmm. If that is the case, and we assume that contained in that neural crest, neural tube, neural ectoderm, neural invagination development, we have the presence of melanin, then it's safe to say that melanin is found throughout our entire body, at least throughout our nervous system.
Yes.
Which suggests to me a whole series of controls and networks throughout the body. Could you touch on, if you will, some internal signals that we might submit to or that we might rely upon to bring us more in touch not only with ourselves, but with each other? That is, those things that we can submit to emanating from us internally to get that signal about our existence and our effort, to develop that existence.
Okay, let me put forth an hypothesis. I wholly maintain that the mechanism, as I said in my presentation, the mechanism of intuition and consciousness, and conscience is contained in the melanin mechanism. That is that those internal cues, you see, intuition is something that does not come to us by way of any identifiable sense vessel, if you will. It is something that emanates from within, you see. And I'm submitting to you that what emanates from within has been sensed by that consciousness capability that's in melanin. I would also go on to say, and I think there's some connection between the melatonin and serotonin, that kind of stuff. I don't understand that language very, I don't speak that particular language. But I'm also convinced in the same way that regulates certain kinds of cycles, it also, I think, regulates the dream network. And the dreaming, and particularly dreaming that is connected with higher plane messages, is brought in through the receptor system of the melanin. Okay? So I think intuition, I think that the mechanism of telepathic reception, and I think that the mechanism of conscience. You know, let me tell you how black folks like keep this stuff hid and don't even know what they got. You remember how our grandparents, maybe you don't, this is a new generation, I don't know how to use these alliterators, but some of you remember how grandparents and parents used to say to you, like, boy, you know better than that. Even when they hadn't told you, you know, they just sort of like look at you like you do something you don't have no business doing, and then they say, you know better than that. And you know, I remember very early, my children, even before we'd said no and spanked hands, sensitivity that even our grandparents, our elders knew was there. And you see, one of the things that has always been true of African people, of black people, is that we never assumed that a person was not capable of conscious conduct. We never assume that. We always assume, no, you ain't no crazy. You may be crazy, but you ain't no fool. You know, we used to say that. You know, we used to say that. Now, there's wisdom in that. You know, you may be crazy, but you ain't no fool, which means that an insanity plea is acceptable. But the absence of moral conscience is totally untenable. You see what I'm saying? So we were saying that Ma'at was reigning even when consciousness was dead, conscience was still alive. Because even though the outer knowledge system could be disrupted, you could never destroy the inner conscience system. So intuition, conscience, and the dream is the mechanisms I would suggest from that. Okay, that was a long answer, and forgive me. Yes, brother.
Hotep, brother.
Hotep.
I was sitting there thinking if you would maybe take a few minutes and share a personal moment with us, and I'm reflecting back to at the point when your third eye opened up, which allowed you to take the quantum leap from where you were at that moment to where you are now.
Okay, I'm not sure what that moment is like, and I'm not sure it's open sometimes. Sometimes I get real blind, so I'm not sure I can see. You know, it's hard to, you see, you remember I was talking about this conversion thing a minute ago. Conversion is not something that happens at a moment. It's a gradual, it's a growth process, it's an evolution, you know. I would have to identify a whole series of incidents that have occurred that have brought me increasingly to an awareness that there were things operating that were not clear to me in previous consciousness that is now clear to me where I am now. So I can now see from a plane that I couldn't see from before. Go ahead.
But still, at some point, a decision had to be made that the effort, time, perseverance, commitment that would take to
let me tell you when I sort of identify as the change for me. And it goes back to that whole issue of making a commitment. One of the things that Elijah Muhammad represented in his program was like he was a confrontation with blackness. You know, he says, here is yourself. Take it or leave it. And what I was struggling with at that time was whether or not I was seriously committed or caught up with the fad of the 60s. You see, was I in a transitory thing, or was I convinced that this thing is life or death? That the lives of black people was what I was committed to. Now, what he offered symbolically was an opportunity for me to look at myself to find out, was I willing to take on the personal responsibility of giving up the wine bottles, giving up the partying, taking on a decision of a certain kind of discipline in order to be of service to my people. Okay? Now, it took me a long time to make that decision. A long time. I fought it like mad. I mean, I loved the party, there were other things that I did that were fun, and it was a struggle. But at the point that I decided that, okay, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to do this. That decision for me opened up the beginning of the kind of growth that I've continued to go on, you see. Now, that was the mechanism for me. I'm not saying that's the whole mechanism for you or anybody else for me, but it was that confrontation with whether or not I was going to make that choice about my life or not that personifies for me the moment of change. And it wasn't a moment, it was a period of change, and the growth has been continuing since that time. Now, I don't know. Something might have come along from some other direction at a later date. I just don't know. But certainly what I heard Malcolm saying in those days about Elijah Muhammad, what I heard Elijah Muhammad saying about himself, what I heard Minister Farrakhan suggesting about Elijah Muhammad, what I was seeing the nation doing at that time, the schools, the newspapers, the network, the economic system, everything I said black people needed, they had. Everything. Everything. A mythological system, a symbolic system, an educational system, a whole concept of history that was theirs, an educational system nationwide, a national newspaper network, a national trucking system, an import mechanism, all of the economic, political, social, spiritual, you name it, cognitive, emotional, all the stuff I thought that we needed was there. So either I was going to go out there and try to reinvent the wheel, or see if there was some way I can understand how they got all this stuff that everybody was talking about we needed. And my commitment was to go and to study that, and I've continued to study that. I've certainly expanded myself beyond that too, but still that ushered in the growth that I'm very grateful that I've always continued to maintain. Okay. Yes, sir. What is our time? We still good? Okay. Yes.
Being a student at a university run predominantly by Africans, I find it utterly